Well, welcome everybody to the Spotlight by Veteran Crowd. After World War II, upwards of 50% of veterans returned and owned a business. And I think it contributed to one of the greatest periods of growth and prosperity this nation's ever seen. Well, today I'm pleased to have as my guest and friend Todd Connor, who's the CEO of Bunker Labs, who's actually doing something about that today. Todd, welcome to the
Thank you,
Veteran Crowd
Bob.
Spotlight. Really,
Good to
really
be with you.
pleased to have you on. We've been good friends now for a number of years, and just really good to have you on the show. I always like to start out, Todd, by kind of asking people where you came from, so everybody knows. Where'd you grow up, and let's talk a little bit about college and how you ended up getting into the Navy.
Sure. Sounds good. Yeah. And first of all, Bob, thanks for having me on, and thanks for what you're doing to create opportunities for veterans. It's a big deal, and yeah, I appreciate it.
I wouldn't be
Um,
doing anything else. This has been great.
yeah, I know it feels at times selfish because I know we have a lot of fun doing what we do, but your heart's in the right place, so I appreciate it. Um, yeah, so I grew up outside Chicago in the suburbs, north suburbs of Chicago. Went to a high school that New Trier High School that had about 800 kids in my graduating class. I went to Northwestern University for college, which is also where my parents went, which is also nearby in Chicago. And got to college as a freshman, and I don't know what your experience was like. I know that you're a VMI grad. Um, but got to
I went to the
college,
uncollege is what we referred to it. So,
the young college.
yeah.
Yes, yeah, I can probably attest to that. That's probably true. My experience at Northwestern was a very normal experience. I was in a fraternity. I was the school mascot. You and I were chatting about that.
Yeah.
I did a lot of things. I did student government. I did a lot of things that were just about being a college student. But one of the things I knew as a freshman was that I wanted to do something bigger. I'd come from a community that was upper middle class, where frankly most of the kids go on to become lawyers and bankers, and sort of rinse and repeat generational kind of traditions of grow up in the suburbs, go to good schools, parents probably pay for it because they have the money to do it. You go back to the suburb and rinse and
Right.
repeat. And I just didn't want to live that cycle for my life. I wanted to do something that felt more service oriented. And I'm not disparaging that, but I wanted to do something that felt adventurous. I wanted to serve our country. I wanted to, flex myself a little bit as an individual. I think as a freshman in college, had I discovered the Peace Corps, I probably would have signed up for the Peace Corps, but I discovered ROTC. And a friend of
Right.
mine said, "Hey, you ought to check this out." And I literally could not have told you the difference between the Army or the Navy. Turned out it was the Navy program, so that's what I joined. And there was two kids from my high school class of 800 that joined the military. There was me, and there was another woman that joined that enlisted in the Marine Corps.
Mm-hmm.
And part of why I do this work around entrepreneurship for the veteran community is I think we have a real societal stake in ensuring that we have participation amongst the wealthy in serving in the military. I think it's important that we have participation amongst the Fortune 100, that we have senators that have worn the uniform. It can't just be something that a small subset of our population goes and does, and that they increasingly come from military communities and military families. If that is where this ends up, it has, in my view,
It's
grave
kind of the
implications for.
family business for a lot of folks, particularly in
Well,
the South.
that's right. And honestly, and I give full credit to them for their service, but I think it can't just be something that kids from military communities from the South go do. It has to be something that all of us feel an obligation to
Were you the
participate
first
in.
member of your family to go into the service, or did you have relatives that had served before?
I had some relatives that had served before, but it was not a family conversation. My dad
Right.
was drafted and served during Vietnam, as many
Uh-huh.
of his colleagues were. But it was a short stint. He didn't talk about it, and he certainly didn't encourage it. Um, he had a good experience. He was stationed in Hawaii and did some things there. But yeah, so it wasn't something that felt. I have two older siblings, neither of whom would have ever considered the military. They have gone on and done great things, but it just wasn't something that was on the table for consideration. Frankly, it wasn't something I had thought about until I got to Northwestern. And even there at Northwestern, the ROTC unit was like a fledgling. I think there was 14 kids my year. that did it. And so, so a very small number of college students that say, because frankly, if you need financial aid, you get it. So there's no real financial incentive for a lot of kids to choose to do it. But so the kids that did it were like me, they just wanted to do it. They wanted to get out there and do something cool. And so I'm grateful for that experience. Graduated 2000, served in active duty for 4 years, was on the USS Bunker Hill, which is sort of the namesake for Bunker Labs that came later.
Neat.
Yeah. And then, gosh, I mean, there's so much, at this point, that's a long time ago. So I got out of the Navy in 2004.
Did you go right back to business school when you got out of the Navy?
I came back to Chicago, and then promptly sort of soon thereafter, started business school. And then, went through business school, went into management consulting, and then at some point started what I would sort of call my entrepreneurial path. And that was in about 2007.
Before we dive into that, I mean, how does a guy become the mascot at this college? I mean, you must be able to dance. Something.
Well, it's funny. Yeah.
You do backflips and that kind of stuff, or I don't know.
Yeah. It's my sister would tell you, it's my never-ending quest for attention.
There you go.
Insatiable.
In front of thousands of fans, huh?
Yeah.
Yes. That's very interesting. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So you get out of business school and you're looking around for something to do. You had a couple of different roles, even dabbled in politics a little bit, and then Bunker happens. I think everybody wants to know what happened to you. What were the transformative things, and where did the idea for Bunker originate?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a hubris in how a lot of people tell the story about what happened back when it started. And so what I want to do, what I don't want to be, is an engine of self-aggrandizing sort of folklore. I think the true story for most people when they start things is that it's messy, it's hard, you're fumbling around.
I call myself an accidental investment banker. I mean, it happened while I was doing something else,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, if I'll tell you the approach I have for how I think I try to live, and then I'll tell you how the Bunker emerged out of that. And the approach I take is just, number one, I want to be of service. I want to be helpful. And that is partly a generous consideration, but it is partly a very selfish consideration, which is, I think you decide early on in life that I want to be of service, and I want to be useful. And you were an investment banker. So I don't know what you were like back in the day, but I know that today you're driven by wanting to be like a do-gooder. And I just think that is a life well lived. And it's something that I think, if you've worn the uniform, is something that is instilled in you early, and you understand what it means to sort of get up and be useful and be part of the solution. And that feels good. And I think you want to do that. So that's one thing. It's just like an ethos of, I want to be in the fight and I want to be useful. I think the other thing is I try to, kind of pursue multiple things at once that seem interesting to me, so at any given time, I've got 3 or 4 things on the hopper that I think are interesting. By the way, 90% of those things, no one else thinks are interesting, and they just kind of come and go. And there's a cutting board, a cutting room floor of ideas of things that I've tried and pursued that haven't worked or haven't made the light of day or whatever. But it's in that spirit of like, you're kicking up dust, you're trying things, you're seeing opportunities, you're starting things. And that's, I think, how you start businesses. It's also how you start nonprofits. And so I was at 1871, which I know you've been to. It's an incubator in downtown Chicago. And it was new, it was exciting. There's a lot happening there. This is 2014. They were doing initiatives for women, and they were doing initiatives for like healthcare, IT, and all these different verticals. And I said, what have you guys thought about or done for military veterans? Has that come up as an idea?
Had you studied the issue before that? You hadn't really dived into the data even at that point, right?
No, that all comes later, frankly. I mean, what's true in that moment is I'm going, this place is cool. A bunch of people are starting businesses. And what's also true in that moment is which is like what I carry and what you carry, is like a care and a concern and a love for the military community. And so I'm going, how do we make sure that they can get into this game?
I think we knew intuitively that veterans did well in business, but in 2014, I'm not sure, we had all the data that we have today.
That's right.
Yeah.
And what's funny is, and this is sort of, because what follows is you kind of, you build the narrative for the work that you're doing, but you don't start there. Where you start is, wow, this is cool. We got to help veterans get involved. By the way, I don't even know if veterans want to start businesses. I'm sure they do. Some do. I don't know how many are out there trying to. And so 1871 said, look, if you want to do something here, we'll support it. And, and if you have an idea of an initiative, let's do it. And so I sort of just took the opening and said, well, yeah, let me put something together because I think it'd be interesting. I don't know what the demand is. We'll find out. And so we launched and announced that we were doing this initiative to help veterans start businesses. And it turns out there was a lot of demand. About 60 people reached out and said, I want to get involved. How do I apply? What does this
Yep.
look like? And so, that's it. That's the thesis. Is like, I want to help. And if people want help, then let's connect.
I think
And
I first got exposed when you positioned in Capitol Post in the Washington, D.C. area. So you started to build satellites. I can't even remember exactly when that was, but I remember meeting Emily McMahon and going up and participating. And you were sort of dropping these incubators within existing incubators, so to speak.
Yeah. Today, I mean, I guess for folks that don't know, just to fast forward because there's a lot of history on this. The genesis is important, which is you're putting an idea into the marketplace and you're waiting to see what comes back. Today, the organization's we have chapters in 32 cities, and it's about a $6 million a year nonprofit with 27 employees, and we're helping about 3,000 people start businesses just in different ways and formats. So I give that just for context of how the whole thing grows, but I didn't at least start with that sort of ambition in sight. It's really, how we got into chapters was people in other cities saying, hey, that's cool. We're doing something similar here in Washington, D.C. at Capitol Post. Can we partner? It's like, sure, let's partner.
Right.
If we share values, then that's not hard. So that's how we scaled initially, was just like me emailing logo files to other like-minded folks and saying, here, and at some point there's diminishing returns on that approach. It's a little too casual. So you try to grow up and organize and create governance, and we ultimately nationalized the organization and rolled everything under one 501c3 charter. And a lot of things happen. At some point you got to have a good strategy, right? Where the passion is necessary but not sufficient for how you grow and scale and create sustainable impact for an organization.
You've got some pretty ambitious goals. I mean, the last, we sat down and talked about you want to be in all 50 states and some other, what's sort of how's the vision evolving today? Gosh, in this environment, you certainly have had to pivot a little bit also. So what's, you
Yeah,
never imagined you'd be a $6 million a year, 32, did you say 32 or 36 states? And locations, but I mean, I bet you didn't envision that in 2014. So
no, you don't. And I think if you're a responsible leader, it never feels like a victory. It's never, those are vanity. They're not vanity metrics. There's just, I give it its context
right.
for the state of things, but it's, I think if you're a responsible leader, number one is you don't do a victory lap because it's not about you. It's about the next person
Right.
who comes into contact with Bunker Labs who's trying to start a business. And we are only as good or as bad as the experience that individual has, whether that's in person or online. So we're very mindful of that, but the ambition is, and I'll tell you why it's the ambition. The ambition is have a presence in all 50 states. And really the strategic purpose that serves is if we can have that breadth of a network, it unlocks value for the military connected community. It's not just like opening up franchises for the sake of opening up franchises. We don't make more money. It costs us more money. But the goal of that is if we can forget the fact that we're a military connected community. If we can be a community with a presence in all 50 states and 3,000 people or 5,000 or 10,000 coming through our ranks every year, the scale of that operation and the breadth of what you see by way of startups is unparalleled, And so if you're a venture capitalist, it flips from being like, how do we make sure that the veterans get access to the VC community? You flip the script to say, if you're a VC, you can't not afford to go take a look at this thing because they have 10,000 interesting ideas pumping through their doors
But you're
every
sort
single
of
day.
VC agnostic. I mean, you know, not every business that comes through Bunker Labs is the next, you know, unicorn, right? There's a
Totally.
lot of
Yeah.
blocking and tackling going on, isn't it?
Oh yeah. And it's not, and I say VCs, but it's about leverage for all the
Right.
conversations. If you want to give franchise opportunities to veterans, hey, there's an organization where they can do that with efficiency. If you want to give small business loans, if you want to create, angel investing, platforms, if you want to, frankly, just the mentorship of the relationship. If you're trying to open up a food truck business in Fort Worth, and we can tell you and put you in touch with 9 other food truck operators, one in Tallahassee, one in Seattle, one in, Chicago. There is huge value in that, where we can create this network effect. I always say that the military community is one of the most powerful alumni networks
Right.
in the world, but we don't have an alumni association, and we don't
Very
have one in the
interesting.
context of entrepreneurship. And that is where, if you ask me, what does it take to start a good business, you need a thriving and robust network, and that is the structural deficit that we're working with.
You guys do talk in some of your literature about, you know, the military networks and 200,000 people rolling out every year. And I've had discussions with other guests on the Spotlight about this very topic where, you know, you've got your network within the military, but you need to be seeding the clouds by building a network that, you know, works in the civilian community so folks can plug in to the Bunker Labs network is very effective. And your analogy of the alumni association is near and dear to me, you know, because of some of the things that I've done. You've attracted also some corporate partners along the way that have helped you in this effort. You know, certainly on the VC and the venture side, there's the Kauffman Foundation. But what about some of the partners that have helped you grow Bunker Labs?
Yeah. No, we've had amazing partners. I mean, USAA, JP Morgan Chase, PwC, just to name a few, Kauffman Foundation, Newman's Own Foundation, McCormick Foundation, the Schultz Family Foundation. I mean, it's a marquee list. I think what I've learned, because I've never started a nonprofit before, so this is my first rodeo, as it were, as it relates to that. Starting a
I've
nonprofit is
started a couple
complicated.
of them that, for different reasons, didn't make any profit. But anyway,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and you have to treat, here's what I tell people that want to start nonprofits, which is about 30% of the community that we're supporting, veterans, because they want to have an impact. And first thing I say is, you can have an impact you can have a very impactful for-profit business. The business, the legal status, not-for-profit, for-profit, is not a proxy for impact. And in fact, non-for-profits are complicated because you have 2 customer segments that you have to serve. One is, in our case, the veterans that are trying to start businesses, and military spouses that are trying to start businesses. So those are our customers. But it's also the people that are paying for this, because we're not for profit. So you got to create a value proposition for those folks. And I think our funders, who are mostly corporate kind of clients, Fortune 100, large, in many cases, financial institutions, they see a value proposition, which is they want to connect in and serve an audience that matters to them as well, because they're small business owners and they're veterans, or, so they have affinity. So I think of it as, we are a conduit for the impact that they want to have. And we have a responsibility to their brand, their reputation, to sort of be really competent, to be trustworthy, to be ethical, to be good, frankly, like, don't, stretch their logos, and, I mean, be thoughtful,
right.
so, and we've had really, we've been very fortunate in having those relationships with those folks. But it's about shared values, shared mission as to what it is that they are trying to do. And they operate with the strategy, and so part of their strategy is somewhere at the intersection of veterans and small business. People ask me sometimes, like, can you help me, can you introduce me to get sponsorship for my nonprofit, which is doing, like, canine dog training or something like that. And I'm like, I can introduce you, but unless there's strategic alignment of their purpose towards your program, it's not gonna work. And that would be true if somebody else wanted to introduce me for, a funder that funds canine training,
Right.
So it's actually, I think people think it's about relationships. Yeah, it's about relationships, but it's more importantly about strategy and competency of being an organization and getting the sponsorship to support it.
I mean, I hate having limited time on calls like this, but we got to pack all this into,
Yeah.
20, 25 minutes to meet my podcasting. So I want to talk a little bit about lessons and advice and guidance, but I understand you're writing a book. You got something coming out in the fall. And so tell us about that.
Yeah, I have a book coming out in the fall. It's done. It's in editorial review, but it's called The Calling, and it's written as a fictional book amongst 6 characters who are based on real life people that I know. And these are 6 individuals that are starting businesses while they hold down day jobs. And they convene in a mastermind group that meets at 5:30 in the morning. And they're hustling to build their American dream. And I wrote the book, Bob, because I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. I think too many of us hold this idea that to be an entrepreneur, you've got to be a Harvard dropout like Mark Zuckerberg, who, by the way, grew up, with parents that were successful, and so could afford to, and I don't say it to take anything away from him, but I say it to help honor the truth. A lot of people are, if you're a Harvard dropout whose parents have money, like, if that's the way you start a business, then there is no path for most minority communities, for the military community, for middle income communities. And so what I wanted to do is illuminate a path, which is, hey, there is a way to do this. And regular people with financial constraints, with kids, with day jobs are doing this stuff. And there's a way to do it. And in fact, research says that the highest predictor for success as an entrepreneur, one of the predictors, is whether you have de-risked the process financially for yourself. So we have this false notion that starting a business is like jumping off a cliff and I'm going to cash in my IRA and I'm going for it. Like, it's like this high risk proposition. That's actually a really unstrategic way to start a business. It's a really dumb way to do it. I tell everyone, do not quit your job. Do not cash in your savings.
I have an
Start
acronym,
doing the thing.
a military acronym called DROOM, DROOM, that someone taught me years ago, which is don't run out of money.
I've never heard that. I'm writing that down.
Yeah, there you
That's
go.
good. So DROOM turns out to be a good strategy, but I think people are in their head, and frankly, this is partly because the military community doesn't have a lot of role models. They don't have as often family members that have done this stuff. And so we think it's either, hey, you're either a Harvard dropout, which doesn't feel attainable to me because I'm not getting into Harvard and I can't afford to drop out,
right,
or I got to get on Shark Tank and it's like a roll of the dice and I need a brush stroke with celebrity in order to make it happen. No, there are ways to do this. And I want to help people understand the ways in which regular people are out there starting businesses, because it's possible.
That's fascinating. So there are 6 people, and you drew from actual folks. I'm assuming that not all of them are veterans in this group of 6. But and let's talk a little bit about. Let me ask you a question. What do you think people get from the military that helps set them up to maybe be a little bit more successful in business? That's my general feeling. It's kind of what I discovered 12 years ago, but what do you think?
I think there are assets and liabilities that come from service in the military, far more assets than liabilities, but there's a couple liabilities, and I'll speak to those quickly. The liabilities, I think, are structural. It's around the network effect,
Right.
So, and frankly, we didn't do ourselves any favors when we went through BRAC and determined that, installation location would have more to do with your congressman's influence than it would have to do with, like, proximity to hot job markets, right? So,
Right.
So if you're getting out of the military, the place that you've been living for the last 3 years is Fort Hood. Well, now you got to take off the uniform, go to a new city, build a new network, right? There's all that is a structural barrier to employment or entrepreneurship on the other side of military service. And so So that to me is the liability that we carry as a community. Now, the flip side of that is the liability has nothing to do with talent. It has everything to do with structural, challenges of getting out of the military. It has nothing to do with talent or ambition. The assets that we bring as entrepreneurs or as employees are, I mean, it's all the good stuff. And frankly, it's the fundamentals that I think a lot of people overlook. It's leadership, it's work ethic, it's professionalism. Like it's that right there, those three. Like if you can be an employee or an entrepreneur who is professional, which is to say you're not going to do things or post something that would get you fired. Which unfortunately we don't have a lot of good role models for this right now. I look at some of our elected officials and I'm like, you wouldn't pass muster. You'd be fired for your behavior. It's embarrassing.
But we could do a whole show on getting more veterans into positions of leadership as
Yeah.
opposed to politics, right?
Yeah, right. Absolutely. And so to me, the fundamentals are like, hey, you're a professional, right? Which is like, you wouldn't get fired by HR. You don't embarrass yourself. You show up, you're polite, number one. Number two, work hard, like, and I know most military veterans I know, they're at their desk by 6:30 a.m. They got the coffee, they're ready to go. It's like work more hours, be more efficient, send more emails. I mean, I think that stuff matters, and that sounds old fashioned, but it's like work hard. It's like, it's not about brilliant ideas. Those are fleeting. Who cares? Everyone's got brilliant ideas, but it's about the discipline of execution that I think the military community understands. So that's number
I
three.
think there's a shortage of personal accountability and the heightened sense of ethics that, I think when you're in the military, you become a professional. There's no unimportant job. You're accountable, whatever your role is, and you take it seriously. And I think that if we could get more of that, in our society, it would benefit everybody.
Everyone. And that's the third thing to me, and I'll call that sort of leadership, and that can be self-leadership or team leadership, but it's leadership is having a set of values, executing against those. And there's with that like a humility of like, hey, every job matters, right? So it's not about who gets credited. It's about, I show up, I make my contribution, and and then the team gets to win. And that's, it's stuff that's innate. I think if you've worn the uniform, and I'm just regularly disappointed in, I think, how that is not as present as it should be in civilian circles, business circles, entrepreneurship circles. But again, I think the military community, we have those assets. Those are assets that serve you in the long game. Values matters. I've seen it time and again. Professionalism matters. Working hard matters. And I just think that's the foundation. And if you execute against those things, you're going to be successful in some way. You don't always know how, but
so sort of two closing questions. What's Bunker Labs doing in this unusual environment? What's sort of the pivot there, and what do you kind of hope to accomplish over the next, I don't know, year or so? What's kind of the short term goal here that you really hope is going to fall into place maybe in the next year that you're working hard on?
Yeah. Well, I'll talk about how we've pivoted, and we'll talk about the goal. The pivot is, you're not doing in-person events. So we had probably 60 events scheduled that we've just canceled all of them
right
in person.
Right.
And our budget has been significantly reduced, partly from external funders, which is a reality that they're, facing. And we've reduced our internal budget because travel and event budget is about half of what we spend. And so that all went away. So the good news is we haven't had to lay folks off. Internally, and the team has never been more focused and revved up because they want to be of value.
Are you going to take some of the things though from the pandemic period and keep them in the future because you found that they were effective because you had to?
Oh, yeah. Well, and even more broadly, I told our team, never let a crisis go to waste. And so if there were things that we were doing that didn't work, let's change it,
Right.
Because you have this kind of, and I think this is true for all entrepreneurs right now. It's like you have this kind of blanket permission to change things because everything's changing. So look, if something be clear eyed about your business. If something wasn't working, and we have stuff that's not working, that's always, that's part of the deal. Well, great. Now we have an opportunity to fix it, and we have permission to do it and do it quicker than we might have had to have or could have before. because we have a global pandemic. So it's an opportunity. And I think, honestly, you got to be an optimist as an entrepreneur and see all of this as an opportunity. Approach it with curiosity, deal in the hard realities of what's going to change, and then have a vision for what follows next. So the vision is, I do believe that we will get back to in-person networking. It's going to matter. It'll, ultimately it still matters. It's still important. We're going to get back to it. We're going to be good at it. But then the digital opportunities are really exciting. So I gave you that food truck example, right? Of like, how do you connect? How do you string together the 10 veterans that all served in the Army who are now all opening up food trucks? If we can figure that out across the country, there's an affinity for them. They will be each other's indispensable tribe. And so I want to figure things like that out quicker than we've been able to in the past.
And a goal for the next year for Bunker Labs?
The goal for the next year is what we've talked about internally is positioning ourselves from, we were trying to inspire people to start businesses 6 months ago. Well, that feels a little bit tone deaf right now. So right now it's about survive. So how do you survive and sustain your business is question number one. And then the question that we're going to be having in about 6 months is, how do you rebound? How do you bounce back? And what are the opportunities, frankly? Once we get through sort of, we're all hunkered down just trying to survive the moment. But once we got on the other side of this, we know historically that there's periods of unprecedented disruption and growth. And so to me, that's scary if you're maybe in wage employment. I think it's very exciting if you're an entrepreneur. And so at some point, we want to be having those conversations about what's possible.
Well, Todd, this has been great. I really do appreciate you coming on the spotlight and sharing all of this with us today. You can follow what Bunker Labs is doing at bunkerlabs.org. I'm assuming you're on social media too, Todd. We're going
You
to
bet.
share your LinkedIn. Are you on Facebook or Twitter or some other things? What do you guys out there?
Twitter, yeah, Twitter at Todd Connor, or LinkedIn at Todd Connor as well, TODDCONNOR.
Okay, well, great. Well, we'll provide the links to that on our note pages, and you can follow the Veteran Crowd Spotlight on podcast platforms like Anchor and Spotify and Google Podcast. We're going to publish podcasts twice a week, shooting to target these things on Tuesdays and Thursday mornings, so please subscribe. And that's a wrap. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Bob.